purpose of the Flick-Reedy Education Enterprises is to promote individual moral responsibility through education. How do we do this? We study and discuss the interrelationships of history, philosophy, social studies, and economics. We do not dictate. We do not make statements as to what we think you should or should not do. We do not unduly burden this program with footnotes, references, or complete documentation. However, we do give sufficient data to bring this discussion into proper focus. We invite you to delve further into the necessary historical and statistical data to develop a deeper understanding of truth and a keener sense of individual moral responsibility.
Again, turning to the American Economic Foundation for the results of their studies in the field of economics, we shall review 12 basic natural laws governing man's economic progress. Again, notice the simplicity and clarity of expression, the choice of easy-to-understand words, permitting no double meanings.
The law of freedom.
Of all God's creations, man alone was endowed with free will. For this reason, man does his best work in an atmosphere of freedom, freedom to choose his labor and freely use the fruits thereof. Only freedom releases all of man's potential energies.
The law of cooperation.
Man cannot prosper alone in a modern economy because he performs only a part of the production process. His work is done as a member of a team, and unless the team prospers, no member can prosper.
The law of inequality.
No human beings are exactly equal in mental and physical ability. To make the best use of its human resources, an economy must accept this fact and must provide opportunity for each man to do what he can do best.
The law of compromise.
Prosperity requires harmony among men. Harmony requires compromise based on good faith and the golden rule. Without compromise, man is confronted either with anarchy or governmental force.
The law of compensation.
Men being unequal, their potential economic contributions are unequal, and there must be, therefore, inequality of reward. The natural way to arrive at the monetary value of any particular ability is through the law of supply and demand. Let the free market decide. Perfect fairness is impossible, but the free market method is the closest that man has found.
The law of responsible authority.
Responsibility without authority generates timidity, indecision, and caution to the point of inactivity. Authority without responsibility generates carelessness, arrogance, favoritism, and potentially disastrous decisions. Responsibility with authority generates balanced judgments, respect for the opinions of others, justice in personal decisions, and prudent planning.
The law of predictable money.
Prosperity requires long-range planning. In a modern economy, the results of long-range planning frequently depend upon the future value of money. Unpredictable money is a major obstacle to economic progress.
The law of enforceable contract.
Economic planning in the modern society requires basing one's actions on the actions that other people have contracted to take. Because honor among men is still far from perfect, there must be legal enforcement of contracts when violations occur.
The law of private property.
Private property is a natural extension of God's law of freedom. The natural desire for personal possession is, aside from hunger and privation, man's greatest incentive to do his best work. Any society whose laws do not release the power of this incentive will never get maximum productivity from its members.
The law of production.
Man produces goods and services by changing the form, condition, and place of natural resources, by applying to them his muscular and mental energy, aided by tools. Tools being the only one of these factors that man has the power to increase. His progress in productivity depends upon his progress in tools.
The law of distribution.
When anything is produced, sooner or later it must be sold, even as junk if need be. The normal selling price of a product is the total of these costs. Costs of outside goods and services, costs of human energy, payroll benefits, and so forth, cost of taxes, cost of tools wearing out, depreciation, etc., cost of using the tools, profit. This is the amount management expects to collect from the customer. If, however, events make the customer willing to pay more or determined to pay less, the selling price will change. The customer always has the final word in distribution.
The law of reasoned fear.
Had primitive man lacked the God-given intelligence to fear the dangerous consequences of his own actions or inactions, he would have been doomed to extinction. Modern man, although free from primitive dangers, should still remain fearful of at least two continuing and sometimes hidden dangers. 1. Personal failure in his contribution to society, and 2. The tyranny of other men. Any philosophy that lulls these fears invites individual and collective disaster. Some sessions back, we discussed economic decay as one of the contributing factors to the fall of nations. Let us now consider some information by which we may judge whether we are experiencing economic decay, and if so, to what extent. Specifically, we will consider a few of the facts concerning debt, spending, and taxes. These three are linked together. We cannot discuss one without the other two. Taxes are the result of spending. Spending cannot be evaluated without considering the debt of the spender. Debt cannot be evaluated unless there is knowledge about the assets of the debtor-spender. Suppose our attention is directed to a man who is spending money as though it was water. He is on what looks like a buying spree, entertainment, luxuries, travel, and so forth. We express concern about the wisdom of the man's actions. How shall we judge his actions? If this man has a home free of debt, has made adequate provision for the financial protection of his family, has substantial insurance or other kinds of protection, has invested well in stocks and bonds, has, in short, taken all reasonable precautions for the security of himself and his family, and is reasonably free of debt, then we might say that the man is simply enjoying the fruits of his labor. He has then deserved the pleasure that his spending is bringing him. He is not acting in an immoral manner. We do not feel harshly toward him, nor could we say he is foolish if he chooses now to spend considerable amounts of money. On the other hand, if we discover that the man is in heavy debt, still owes a great amount of money on his home, does not have adequate insurance protection for himself and his family, little or no money in his bank account, and has bought a multitude of things on time payments, and for which he is behind on his payments, then, if all of these things are true, and he is engaged in such a spending spree, we would agree that he is an utter fool, and worse than that, he is immoral. He has no sense of responsibility to himself and his family, or to others. He does not seem to know the value of money. In these respects, governments are not very different than people. If we are to understand the financial position of the United States, we must look at debt, spending, and taxes together. We must try to determine the balance of debts and assets behind the spending actions of our country. In considering these things, we shall be talking about sums of money in billions. A billion is so large a number that it's difficult to imagine. It's like the light year or the megaton. I know I can hardly grasp the significance of such a number, and perhaps you have the same difficulty as I do. In an attempt to help us visualize how big $1 billion is, let us suppose that you and I had $1 billion in front of us, and that we had started the day that Christ was born and burned $1,000 each day. How long would it have lasted? Well, we actually would still have a pretty big stack of dollars in front of us today, enough to burn $1,000 a day for more than another 770 years. That's how much $1 billion is. What are the assets of our country? the value of everything we have, land, buildings, equipment, inventory, including institutional and government property and foreign assets? Well, for the year 1958, it looked like this. Assets, structure, equipment, inventory, and land, 1,389 billions. Institutional and government property and foreign assets, 293 billions. Total assets, 1,682 billions. Now let's take a look at all of our liabilities, both public and private, for the same year, 1958. Liabilities. Federal liabilities and debt, 701 billions. State and local debt, 47 billions. Corporate debt, 233 billions. Individual debt, 222 billions. Total debt, 1,203 billions. We can see that our total assets do not add up to very much more than our total debts for the year 1958. What's your opinion as to whether the situation looks better or worse today than it did in 1958? Wait, you say. That federal debt of $701 billion looks about twice as high as I remember the figure. I know our debt has increased some, but I didn't think it had doubled. You are right in general. But you see, the usual figure of 300+ billion does not include quite a few things that are real liabilities just the same. How about all the pensions we have promised to pay our military folks, and civil service workers in government service, and quite a few other obligations we as a nation have assumed, promises we are morally obliged to keep. Now let's take a look at governmental expenditures, starting back at the turn of the century in 1902, then hitting 1922, 32, 40, 50, and 1960. We will consider expenditures on a per capita basis to reflect honestly the increase in population for that period. By a color code, we will try to give you an idea of the division of the per capita expenditure by local, state, and federal governments each year. In 1902, the per capita expenditure was $21, with $12 local, $2 state, and $7 federal. In 1922, per capita expenditure had risen to $86, with $39 local, $12 state, and $35 federal. In 1932, the beginning of the Great Depression, per capita expenditure was only $100, with $45 local, $21 state, and $34 federal. In 1940, before World War II got going very far, per capita expenditure was up to $156, with $44 local, $35 state, and $77 federal. By 1950, per capita expenditure climbed rapidly to $473, with 86 local, 86 state, and 301 federal. By 1960, although the proportion of spending between local, state, and federal remained about the same, the amounts increased almost double. Total per capita expenditure reached $864, with local $164, state $153, and federal $548. In all fairness, we must remind ourselves that governments, local, state, or federal, rarely give their citizens things that some of them haven't asked for first. So to be truthful about the matter, it would have to be said that we, the people, ask for these kind of expenditures. Now let's look at government debt, again on a per capita basis, to take into consideration our expanding population during this period. Again, we will use 1902, 22, 32, 40, 50, and 1960, with the understanding that these debt figures are cumulative and again show the breakdown between local, state, and federal. In 1902, per capita debt totaled $42, with $24 local, $3 state, and $15 federal. By 1922, it climbed to $305 per capita, with 83 local, 10 state, and 212 federal, reflecting World War I. By 1932, the figure had remained almost the same, with a total per capita debt of $312, with 132 local, 23 state, and 157 federal. Now, the picture begins changing very rapidly. In 1940, per capita debt reached a total of $483, with 128 local, 27 state, and 328 federal. But this 57% increase in per capita debt was child stuff compared with what was to come. In 1950, per capita debt totaled a whopping $1,894, with $127 local, $36 state, and $1,731 federal. A total increase of almost threefold, with the federal portion of it representing 91% of the total. By 1960, it had climbed still further for a per capita total of $2,010, with 288 local, 105 state, and 1,617 federal. It's easy to see where we, the people, have asked the vast majority of the spending and debt to occur in the federal sector, in the naive belief that somehow Washington, D.C. has an almost inexhaustible supply of money that doesn't have to come from all the individual taxpayers, or their children, or their grandchildren. If you find those figures frightening, ask yourself what that chart is going to look like for 1970. While learned professors disagree about whether this amount of debt is critical or not, all are agreed that the continuing trend of spending more than we have collected in taxes is cause for alarm and concern. When will we stop it? What services from any and all of our governments will we be willing to do without? I have a clipping from a newspaper, the Chicago Daily News, authored by its former editor, Mr. John S. Knight, who pointed out some interesting spending items in the federal budget. The news article is dated September 28, 1963. He was talking about the $14 billion research and development programs and says,
4. Among the many essential research programs required for national defense and other important areas are also found these fantastic requests. $16,000 for a study of special behavior among termites. $17,500 for a study of the modification of alcohol preference in rats. $2,100 for a study of the behavior patterns of the barren ground caribou. $17,000 to revise the classification of earthworms. $13,000 to examine the social structure of Madagascar. $7,000 for a psycholinguistic analysis of consonant clusters. $29,000 for a study of the mammal fauna of the Klurcher highlands of Ethiopia. $11,000 for a study of Abenaki dialects. $50,000 for a study of correlates of persuasibility. $65,000 for a study of behavior and ecology of the wandering albatross. And to cap it all, about $1 million for a study of the affectional relationship between a monkey and his mother.
One of the stern lessons of history is that whenever a nation descends into economic chaos, its citizens cry out for a knight on horseback with flaming sword and burnished armor to lead them out of chaos. Recall that in Spain, the horse was olive drab. In Italy, it was a black horse. In Germany, a brown horse. In our own country, while there may have been a few pinkish tinges, the color was white. If we are ever to experience economic problems in the United States again, comparable to the 30s, I hope the horse will be white as snow. But the odds are on the side of it being blood red. We will close with a lesson from history to serve as a prophetic warning to us. In writing about the citizens of the first great republic of the Western world, the Athenians, A Greek historian philosopher says,
"In the end, more than they wanted freedom, they wanted security. They wanted a comfortable life, and they lost it all. Security and comfort and freedom. When the Athenians finally wanted not to give to society, but for society to give to them, when the freedom they wished most for was freedom from responsibility, then Athens ceased to be free and was never free again."
Whether we talk about the freedom of the free enterprise capitalistic economic system, or any and all of our freedoms, who can save them but you and I? Let us assume our individual moral responsibility as God gives us the vision to see it. Whatever direction our country may go, let us face up to saying, "We are responsible," instead of saying, "I hope they do something about it."